Hi, I'm Walter McCullough, and we are at the Pachamama Coffee Cooperative in Midtown Sacramento on 20th Street. And here they make only certified organic coffee. With me for coffee and conversation are 4 Sacramento-based voters here to discuss gun control. Let's meet our guests.
My name is Annette Emery, and I believe we do need more gun control in this country. I was a victim of an armed robbery, about 20-something years ago. I just believe we are just a culture where we just assume guns are the norm, and I'd like to change that culture with more gun control.
My name is Craig DeLuz, and I am a supporter of the Second Amendment. I believe that it's a vital civil right, and a lot of people don't necessarily think of it as a civil right, but that's what civil rights are. They're the rights that are due to all of us as citizens.
My name is Rebecca Gonzalez, and I'm in favor of sensible restrictions on gun ownership. As I was growing up, a family friend was killed by gun violence and also gang violence in my hometown.
My name is Jeff Brown, and today I'm here to advocate in favor of less gun control. As an avid hunter and outdoorsman, I appreciate the gun ownership rights of rural folks that are more inclined to think of guns more as a tool rather than something that's a weapon or something to be demonized.
Everyone is settled in and eager to talk. What comes to mind when you hear the words gun control?
To me, it speaks directly to infringement of rights, and more specifically in California, it begins to become a slippery slope where every legislative session you see a little bit more, and to me it's very subjective, and I think the question we need to be asking is, where do we draw the line and say, okay, guns may not be the issue.
How do you respond to that?
I think we do need more gun control. I think that as a culture in the United States, we've just become used to the idea that guns are just there, people use them, and I think we do need to have gun control in order to go and make it so that guns are not the go-to idea when people are having arguments or anything else. And I do think gun control maybe saves us from ourselves.
Rebecca?
I prefer to call it gun violence prevention efforts, and I am very much in favor of that. I think we can all agree that we have too much gun violence in America and in our state also, and I think that reasonable restrictions that prevent the wrong people from having firearms are very important, and I think there's a lot we could do to save lives in California.
Kind of piggybacking off of what she said, it's not a gun violence issue, it's a violence issue. I mean, the reality is, gun control is all about controlling a tool that is used by some people to commit violence and by some people to defend themselves from those who are seeking to commit violence.
Now, you heard her respond.
Yeah.
Is there something that you'd like to direct directly to her?
In California, we have a lot of the laws that the rest of the country that a lot of the country who wants gun control would like to see, and yet it still hasn't ended gun violence. You still have people shooting people on school grounds. You still have people who are utilizing firearms that are illegal in California. And that's because, guess what? Criminals don't follow the law.
Jeff, do you have anything to add to this?
I just think that as you go down this path of gun control, you begin to demonize an inert object. And guns themselves, they don't act on their own. It's usually a bad actor that has to use it in conjunction to, commit a bad deed. And unfortunately, just as Craig had mentioned, unfortunately only the law-abiding citizens then get affected by that because any criminal can just circumvent these gun laws.
This is said all the time, guns don't kill people, people kill people. But the reality is that when you do have a bad actor and they have access to a gun, they're more likely going to use that instead of something else. We have too many guns. There's just too many guns around. I know you're a hunter, and I have no problem with people hunting. I think, something that, my in-laws hunted. It's absolutely I have no problem with it. But AR-15s, that's not used for hunting.
Craig, I noticed you're biting your tongue.
First of all, yes, AR-15s are used for hunting. They're used for all sorts of things. The thing is that, first of all, let's understand, people say, well, you don't need. It's called the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. The problem is, in California, the people who don't understand it are the people who are making the public policy.
I think that it can create an inconvenience to have to fill out the form and have a waiting period, but I think it's really important that we keep guns out of the wrong hands. And I also agree with Annette that I don't have a problem with hunting. I realize it's part of a lot of people's family culture and background. Shooting sports, I mean, it's a sport in the Olympics. I mean, I agree that there are people that really enjoy that, and I wouldn't want to restrict that.
Jeff, what is your response to that process?
The problem is that, you know, when these guns get into the hands of people who have gone through no background check and they've just bought the weapon on the street, there needs to be a counterforce to that. And a weapon is a very important tool, I feel, an integral part of home security.
Do the current laws that we have in place, do they need to be enforced?
Whether it was the incident in Parkland where whether it was the police or the people on campus actually notified the FBI, people notified local law enforcement, nothing was done. Whether it was the shooting in Orlando where the individual had already been turned down for a concealed carry. I mean, all of these number of instances where there are failures of government, but the answer always seems to be, well, we need more government. Clearly, no one implemented the laws, so maybe we should just pass more laws. Maybe then they'll enforce those laws.
As technology evolves, sometimes there's a need for new laws, such as ghost guns or 3D printing, you know, instances such as that.
Let me ask you guys real quickly, how many of you are parents? Okay, so you're all parents. Now, there's been a lot of talk, especially following the Parkland shooting, that teachers and principals and staff should carry guns. Let's talk about that one.
I would be opposed to that.
Yeah.
I'm more inclined to think that I would prefer to see a sheriff's substation embedded in each school rather than just, you know, a neighborhood sheriff's substation. Integrate the two and have trained law enforcement personnel on site there to protect the kids, and there's no reason to have untrained, you know, people that their focus is education, handling firearms and things like that.
If you have a teacher who has or desires to get a concealed carry permit, to go through all of the training, to go through all of the background checks in order to know exactly know what the law is, know how to utilize a firearm in those particular purposes, in those particular instances, why wouldn't we allow them to do that?
And how do you respond to that?
I am absolutely not supportive of that. I don't think that teachers are law enforcement. And a lot of times police officers don't react appropriately, and they have tons of training. I just don't see someone who is not law enforcement being able to do that.
While everyone around the table has a different opinion about gun control, they all agreed it's a topic worth discussion this election year. Walter McCullough, KCRA 3 News.